First thing I noticed was not what she said. It was the way she said it. Calm. Like she'd been rehearsing it for a while. Like she'd already decided how the conversation was going to end before it started. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around her coffee mug, and told me that she thought it was time I reassessed my friendship with Hank. That was the word she used. Reassessed. I remember looking at her and thinking, she doesn't know what she's asking. She doesn't know what that man is to me. And then I thought, maybe that's the real problem. My name doesn't matter much for this story. What matters is that I was 57 years old when I married my second wife, and I had been sober for 11 years by then. 11 years. Every single one of them mattered. Every single one of them had Hank somewhere in the picture. I met Hank when we were both 23, working the floor of a steel fabrication plant outside of Akron, Ohio. He was the kind of guy who showed up 15 minutes early every shift, brought lunch from home, and still somehow had time to notice if you were having a bad day. We worked side by side for 4 years. Then the plant downsized. We both found other work, and life did what life does. It pulled us in different directions. But we never lost each other. Not once in 34 years. He was there the night I got the call that my first wife had been in an accident on I-76. He drove 2 hours in a snowstorm to sit with me in a hospital waiting room and didn't say a single word for the first 40 minutes, because he understood that I didn't need words. He was there 3 years later when she passed. He stood next to me at the graveside and held my arm because my knees weren't working right, and I was too hollowed out to be embarrassed about it. And when the drinking got bad, and it did get bad, the kind of bad that creeps up on you so slowly you don't recognize yourself until you're looking in the mirror at someone you used to know. Hank was the one who drove me to my first meeting. He sat in the parking lot and waited. He did that for 3 weeks straight every Tuesday and Thursday, without being asked twice. That's who Hank was. I met my second wife through a mutual friend at a cookout in the summer. She was 10 years younger than me. Sharp, funny, the kind of woman who could hold a conversation with anyone in the room. I was not expecting to fall in love again at that point in my life. I had made a quiet peace with the idea that my story had a certain shape and that love was mostly behind me, but she had a way of making me feel like I was still worth something, like I still had chapters left. We dated for about 1.5 years. She met Hank early on, within the first few months. The three of us had dinner once at a place in town, a steakhouse I liked. Nothing fancy. It seemed fine. She laughed at his stories. He was polite, a little quieter than usual, which I noticed but didn't think much of. Afterward, in the car, she said he seemed nice. I should have paid more attention to the word seemed. We got married on a Saturday in October. Psalm. We got married on a Saturday in October. Small ceremony. Hank was there. He gave a toast that made half the room tear up because that's how Hank talks about people he loves, simply and without anything held back. We settled into married life. I retired from the logistics company where I'd been a regional manager for 19 years. She still worked, ran her own bookkeeping business out of the house. We had a good routine. Quiet mornings, dinner together most nights, weekends that didn't have much urgency to them. Hank and I still talked on the phone a few times a week, usually in the evenings after dinner, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for over an hour. We talked about the same things we always talked about: old memories, sports, his grandkids, my daughter from my first marriage, how the country was going, what we'd been reading. There was nothing secret about it. I never hid when I was calling him. I didn't step outside or lower my voice. I just picked up the phone and called my oldest friend. The first time she mentioned it, I thought it was a passing comment. We were watching television and I got up to call Hank back. He'd left the message earlier, and when I came back she said something like, "You two are like teenagers with that phone." I laughed. I didn't think anything of it. The second time, a few weeks later, it was different. I'd spent a Saturday afternoon helping Hank move some things around at his garage. He'd had a minor back procedure the month before and his son lived out of state. So I went over, we loaded some boxes, rearranged some shelving, had sandwiches in his kitchen, and watched the game for an hour. I was home by 4 in the afternoon. She didn't say anything until after dinner. Then she said, "I feel like you're more available to him than you are to me." I didn't respond the right way. I said something defensive, something about how long I'd known him, and she shut down the conversation by saying she didn't want to argue. But I felt the shape of something forming. I just didn't have a name for it yet. Over the next several months, the comments became more pointed. She started asking why Hank never invited both of us to things. I explained that Hank wasn't much of a gatherer. He was a one-on-one kind of person, always had been. She said that seemed strange to her. I said it was just how he was. She said she thought it was worth looking at. She started keeping a kind of informal accounting of how often I saw him versus how often we did things as a couple. I didn't realize she was doing this until she brought it up one evening with a specificity that surprised me. She knew exactly how many Saturday afternoons I'd spent at his place in the past 4 months. She asked me once, directly, whether Hank had ever said anything negative about her. I told her no, which was true. Hank had never said a single negative word about her to me. What I didn't say was that Hank had, once, quietly asked me if I was happy. Just that. "Are you happy?" And I'd said yes. And he'd nodded and let it go, and that was the whole conversation. By the time we hit the 18-month mark of our marriage, she had stopped pretending the issue was minor. One evening she sat me down and told me that my friendship with Hank was not appropriate for a married man, that we were too close, that the time I gave to him was time I was withholding from her, that she felt like she was competing for her own husband. I asked her what she wanted me to do. She said she wanted me to pull back. Not end it completely, she said. Just create some distance. Call him less. See him less. Let the friendship settle into something more appropriate. I sat with that for a long time. I told her I'd think about it. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I don't think I handled it perfectly. I did pull back. For about 6 weeks I called Hank less. I turned down 2 of his invitations to come over. I told myself I was trying to make my marriage work, that compromise was part of this, that she had a right to feel like a priority. Hank didn't push. He just said okay when I said I was busy. He checked in by text occasionally. He didn't make it a thing. But I noticed something during those 6 weeks. My wife didn't seem happier. She didn't seem more connected to me or more at ease. She seemed, if anything, more watchful, more interested in knowing where I was and who I'd spoken to. She asked once if I talked to Hank that day with a tone that told me the question wasn't casual. And I started to understand that the request had never really been about the amount of time. It was about something else. I just didn't know what yet. The thing that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in March. I was looking for a document, a copy of our homeowner's insurance policy that I needed to fax to our contractor, who was giving us an estimate on some foundation work. My wife handled most of our paperwork. She kept files in her home office, organized in a cabinet by the window. She had told me more than once that I was welcome to look through anything in there. I found the insurance file. And next to it, in a folder I didn't recognize, I found something else. It was a printed email exchange between my wife and a family law attorney in the next county over. The first message was from 8 months ago. The second was from 6 months ago. The second was from 6 months ago. The subject line on the first one said, "Initial consultation follow-up." I stood in that room for a long time. I didn't take the folder. I put everything back exactly where I found it. I went and faxed the insurance document. I came home and made lunch and sat at the kitchen table and ate it by myself because she was on a call in her office. I didn't say anything to her that day, or the next day, but I called Hank that evening, for the first time in weeks, and I told him what I'd found. He didn't say much. He listened all the way through. Then he said, "You know what you need to do." I said I did. He said, "Then, I'm here whenever you need me." That was all he said. That was all I needed. I want to tell you about the person Hank is, because I think it matters for this story. When I was in the worst of it, the drinking years, the grief years, the years where I was going through my first wife's illness and then the aftermath of losing her, Hank never once made me feel like a burden. He showed up. He answered the phone at 11 at night. He sat with me. He drove me where I needed to go. But here is the thing I've never told many people. When I got sober, I didn't do it through a program alone. I did it through a program, and through a sponsor, and through Hank. The 3 of us were a system, whether they knew it or not. My sponsor gave me the framework. The program gave me the community. Hank gave me the consistency. The friend who checked in not because he was supposed to, but because he wanted to. The friend who would show up on a random Wednesday just to sit on my porch for an hour because he knew Wednesdays were hard. He gave up drinking too during that first year of my sobriety. He wasn't a heavy drinker, a few beers on weekends, never a problem for him. But he told me once, quietly, that he figured if I was going to do this, the least he could do was not wave a beer in front of me every time we were together. So he just stopped. Didn't announce it. Didn't make it about him. Just stopped. I didn't find out for 3 months. He mentioned it in passing. I told him he didn't have to do that. He shrugged and said he didn't really miss it anyway. That's Hank. I met with an attorney myself on a Thursday morning 2.5 weeks after finding that folder. I didn't tell my wife I was going. I told her I had an errand to run. I drove to an office building in a town 40 minutes away because I wanted to be somewhere she wouldn't recognize anyone, and I sat across from a family law attorney for an hour and a half and listened. Ohio is an equitable distribution state, not a 50-50 split, but fair, meaning a judge looks at the contributions each person made to the marriage, the length of the marriage, the financial circumstances of both parties, and divides assets accordingly. We had been married 22 months by then. She had not contributed financially to the household in a meaningful way. Her bookkeeping business had actually been running at a loss that she hadn't mentioned to me until 6 months in. My pension, my retirement accounts, my house, which I owned outright before the marriage. Most of what I had built over decades was mine before she entered the picture. The attorney was measured and careful, but she was clear. I was not in a weak position, especially if my wife had already initiated consultation with her own attorney. In Ohio, once you've established that both parties have sought counsel, the process tends to move fairly straightforwardly. I thanked her, paid the consultation fee, and drove home. I did not feel angry. That surprised me. I expected to feel something sharp and hot. Instead, I felt something quieter, something I recognized from a long time ago. The particular clarity that comes when you finally stop pretending you don't know what you know. The conversation with my wife happened about a week later. She brought up Hank again. She said she had been thinking about it, and she felt like she had been patient enough, and she needed me to make a decision about what kind of marriage I wanted and what kind of friendship was compatible with that. She said it calmly, almost gently, like she was doing me a kindness by drawing the line so clearly. I looked at her for a long moment. I told her that I had found the folder in March, the one with the email exchanges with the attorney. I told her I had retained my own attorney 3 weeks ago. I told her that I had not mentioned it because I wanted to give it time, to make sure I was thinking clearly and not reacting. She went very still. I told her I wasn't angry. I meant it. I told her that the marriage had not been what either of us had hoped, and that I believed we had arrived at this point together, not through any single person's fault, and that I wanted us to handle what came next with as much dignity as we could manage. She didn't say much. She asked if this was really what I wanted. I said it was. She asked if it was because of Hank. I told her honestly, no, it wasn't because of Hank. It was because she had sat across from me for months talking about trust and commitment while she was already consulting a lawyer, and that was not a foundation I could build on. We were quiet for a while after that. She said she needed to call someone. I said, of course. I went and sat out on the back porch. The yard looked the way it always looked in April, just starting to come back. The grass still pale in patches, the oak at the back fence not fully leafed out yet. I sat there for a long time and didn't think about very much. Eventually, I called Hank. He picked up on the second ring. I told him how it went. He said, "You all right?" I said I was. He said, "You want company tonight?" I said no, I was fine, but thank you. He said, "Okay, call me tomorrow." I said I would. That was the whole conversation. My daughter took it hard at first. She had liked my wife. She had thought the marriage was good for me. She called me the night after and asked what happened, and I explained it as plainly as I could, and there was a long silence. And then she said, "Dad, I didn't know any of this was going on." I told her that was the point. I hadn't wanted to worry her. She came down to visit the following weekend. She and Hank had always gotten along. She'd known him her whole life, called him Uncle Hank until she was in her 30s. We all had dinner together at my house, the 3 of us, and it was the most normal I'd felt in months. Her kids called during dessert on video chat, and we spent 20 minutes talking to my grandchildren about nothing important. A school play, a loose tooth, a dog that had gotten into the garbage, and by the time we hung up, I was doing fine. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. It was not dramatic. Our attorneys handled most of it. The house stayed mine. She received a fair settlement from the joint account we had built together during the marriage, which I did not contest. She moved back to the city where her sister lived. I wished her well, and meant it. I am not telling this story to relitigate what happened, or to paint a picture of a villain. I don't think she was a villain. I think she was someone who wanted something from a marriage that I either couldn't give or wasn't giving. And instead of saying so directly, she started working a parallel track. People do that. I have done versions of it myself at different points in my life. I understand the impulse even when I can't respect the action. What I know is this. I am 59 years old. I have a daughter who calls me every Sunday. I have 2 grandchildren who think their grandfather is reasonably interesting. I have a house I built up over 20 years that still needs some work on the foundation but is otherwise solid. I have 11 years of sobriety that I protect the way some men protect their savings. Carefully, daily, with the understanding that it is not guaranteed to stay. And I have Hank, who will answer the phone on the second ring, who shows up without being asked, who gave up something small without making it into something big because that is who he is. My wife once told me that no 2 men should need each other the way we did, that it wasn't natural, that there was something off about it. I thought about that for a while. I still think about it sometimes. What I've come to believe is that she was describing something she had never had. The kind of friendship that runs so deep it doesn't need to explain itself. The kind that isn't threatened by time or distance or the ordinary failures of human life. Most people spend their whole lives hoping for one friendship like that. I've had it for 34 years. I wasn't going to give that up. Not for an ultimatum. Not for a marriage that was already quietly ending before I knew enough to grieve it. I chose the man who drove 2 hours in the snowstorm to sit with me in silence. The man who quit drinking so I wouldn't have to do it alone. The man who asked simply and without pressure, "Are you happy?" And let me answer honestly. Some choices aren't hard. They just feel that way until you make them. I think about that folder sometimes. The way it was sitting right there next to the insurance file, ordinary looking. The kind of manila folder you'd buy in a pack of 20 at any office supply store. Nothing about it looked like a turning point. But it was. What I've come to understand, not right away but slowly, the way most real things settle in, is that life has a way of making the truth available to you. You don't always go looking for it. Sometimes it's just there, waiting, and what matters is whether you have the honesty to look at it straight. I didn't handle everything in this story perfectly. I pulled back from Hank when I shouldn't have. I told myself I was being a good husband, when really I was just avoiding a harder conversation. That's not something I'm proud of. But I also think that 6 weeks taught me something important, that when you compromise the right things for the wrong reasons, the problem doesn't go away. It just gets quieter while it gets bigger. There's a word for what Hank has always had, and it isn't loyalty, though he has that too. It's integrity, the kind that doesn't announce itself. He gave up drinking because it was the right thing to do for someone he cared about, and he didn't make a story out of it. He showed up in snowstorms in waiting rooms and on porches on hard Wednesdays, not because anyone was keeping score, but because that's who he decided to be. That kind of character doesn't happen by accident. It's built, quietly, over a lifetime of small choices that nobody's watching. I didn't always have that. There were years when I was not the man I should have been. Not to my first wife, not to myself, not to the people who depended on me. The drinking was part of it, but the drinking was also a symptom. Underneath it was something harder to name, a habit of looking away from things that required courage to face. Getting sober didn't fix that overnight. It just gave me enough clarity to start working on it. What this marriage taught me, what I'm still learning, is that real wisdom isn't about knowing the right answer in the moment. It's about having done enough honest work on yourself that when the moment comes, you don't panic. You don't react. You go find the insurance file. You read what's in front of you. You put the folder back exactly where you found it, and you give yourself 3 weeks to think clearly before you say a word. That kind of steadiness isn't something you're born with. You build it, usually through failure, sometimes through loss. I'm 59 years old and I'm not finished making mistakes. But I know a few things now that I didn't know at 40. I know that the people worth keeping in your life are the ones who show up when it costs them something. I know that an ultimatum is rarely about the thing it claims to be about. And I know that the life you protect, your sobriety, your dignity, your oldest friendships, is the life you've actually built. Everything else is negotiable. Some choices look hard from the outside. From where I was standing, looking out at that April yard, it wasn't hard at all.